Hello, my name is Valentina Ahumada, and this is a reflection on my professional practice. For giving you a context, I made my practice in Liceo Técnico Talcahuano, in the city of Talcahuano. Now, currently, are between 450 to 500 students enrolled, and the high school has four technical degree programs. There are hospitality and service, nurse assistant, gastronomy, and preschool assistant. I worked with a third year high school group that was in the hospitality and service program. I was the teacher for the specialty English program because they had the regular English program in the curriculum and also this specialty program. I was the one that it was in charge to teach them with the specialty vocabulary, with working related issues, how to make a curriculum in English, etc., etc. And those students, according to the Common European Framework, they were between the A1 and A2 level, and I will dare to say that there were some students who were below, and I had between three or four students who were reaching B1 level. And the needs analysis overview, I have 10 questions in total. 5 were multiple choice and 5 were open ended. The key focus areas for this need analysis were to find out the motivation for the students to learn English, their current English skill proficiency, and how they perceive the usefulness of English skills for their future work setting. This was highly important for me because regarding the last parts, how they perceive the usefulness of their English skills, I made the objectives of the unit. They told me that they wanted to be proficient at the time of speaking. They needed to work in their speaking abilities, especially because in fourth year of high school, they go to their practices too, and they do their practices in resorts and hotels in really tourist areas of the Biobío region. So I made sure that we work on the communicative competences. I made sure that we did classes with contextual relevance to them. And given the high school curriculum, my primary working context was the preparation for them to be able to work and communicate in our work environment. So I made sure, as you can see, that in all my lessons I had a lot of speaking activities, even if they were not the main focus of the activity. I always wanted to have between 15 minutes to 20 minutes for them to speak, to create dialogues, to make role play, etc. And this came handy when I had to use material. But the adaptation of the materials was something that challenged me a lot. In the needs analysis, the students told me that they wanted to do interactive elements. So, because they wanted to work with PPT presentations, with videos, those things required a data projector, and my high school didn't have many that were useful. And because of this lack of resources and my inability to obtain a functional data projector, I had to share the videos in advance with the class president, who was a sweetheart and let me use her personal email to send those videos. And in the alternatives to the visual aids, I use full color printed handouts. I made sure I had print all the material they were going to work with, and instead of using the always seen black and white impressions, I use my own printer. So I spend a lot of time making colorful material, and this come in handy with the adaptations in the UDL. I didn't have many students who were visually impaired or who use hearing aids. I had two that they weren't visually impaired, but they had some trouble with some fonts at the hour of printing handouts. So I just made their own version of the handout with a larger font, with a clearer font, and because of the goal of the UDL is to ensure the accessibility and to cover diverse learning methods, I introduce in my classroom a lot of different methods of representation, and I also use a lot of contextualization regarding the real life context of the students regarding where they live. I made a lot of activities regarding Talcahuano as a city, because these kids are really proud of coming from Talcahuano, and that's something unusual. So I tackled that. I made reference to the carnival here in Talcahuano because I knew that most of my students had a part in that carnival. They participated in it. So I made those adaptations, and those adaptations were reflected in the assessment. The majority of students, as I mentioned before, expressed concerns regarding their lack of proficiency in communication. So the assessments were weighted mostly toward the speaking skill to address this need directly. The methods I included were oral presentation and recreation of dialogues. For example, I made that assessment that you're seeing in the pictures. That was for them to make a brochure talking about different type of emergencies, and after that they had to role play like um, a worker in a hotel that was giving them instructions in case of an earthquake, in case of fire, just like the air hostesses when they give the instructions aboard the plane. The same but with my students. Now moving on to the cultural considerations, I had a lot of Venezuelan students, a lot. In the first two classes, I realized that when I translated things to Spanish, I did it in a very idiomatic way, so my Chilean students could understand, but for them was pretty difficult. Also, there was like maybe social constructs that we here in Chile have that they didn't have back in Venezuela. So I made a small group between like three or four Chilean students who wanted to work with me with this, and we create a mini part of the class, a mini section where I worked with them and these Chilean students, who began to teach them idiomatic expressions, cultural references, and there was a really nice moment of sharing information back and forth between different cultures. So to facilitate the peer-to-peer collaboration, I made my Chilean students to volunteer to clarify all of those idiomatic conceptions. Now, on my reflection on effectiveness, I think that I made a good job. I had really good grades at the end of the semester, at the end of the unit. The direct needs were addressed. The students showed a lot more of participation, and they showed me that they had improved their communication skills. It even increased their participation in class. All of them got really high grades. My assigned teacher was really happy about this. He told me that he was really proud about how I manage the way the students collaborate between each other, how they talk. They even learned how to be polite in Spanish. That was something that shocked me. Most of them didn't know how to use a polite record even in their first language. So I also worked with that. I did beyond maybe what I should have done. And for the last part, in the continuous improvement, no, before moving to that, um, if I had to change something from my class, it would have to be that I spend more classes of what I would have liked, rehearsing basic concepts, because before doing the needs analysis, when I just meet the students, I thought they could do more. For example, I asked them in a pretty early stage to do things that for me were the standard, but for them were really complicated. And I made sure that I had to spend a few classes rehearsing old concepts. In their base curriculum English class, they were not doing so great, so I had to tackle those things too. And that cost me a lot of time in the classes. I could have made a lot more maybe if I wouldn't spend that time working with the students toward uh, leveling them in the same starting point. So that is something that I would have changed. And well, for the last part, the continuous improvement, I believe that I improve at managing unexpected situations while maintaining a strong structure in the classroom. For example, a few times I had to completely modify my planned lesson on the day because their material was not available, the students had a pedagogical leave, or a strike, and I realized that I can be flexible enough to solve problems and keep track of the class without the students noticing, and achieving this objective of the class with the respective assessment of it despite the impromptu modifications. And in areas for improvement, I would say that time management is something that is still I still have space for improvement there. I was not really good at managing my time. Many times I had to rush out the class, and I spent a lot of time in things that maybe were not that important, but I make sure that I want them to be perfect. So I have to learn how to be more flexible. And well, in my final reflection, this semester put me through a lot of both physical and emotional stress. Without a doubt, I must recognize, I became unsure of seeking this path in education as a truly sustainable path for my life. But within 2 months, I was already in love with the experience again, with the professor, with the students. And now, just few days short of leaving the high school, my students are currently begging me not to leave and so for me to stay with them. And this experience taught me a lot, not only about myself, but also about the true kind of nature my teaching approach is, and how to manage my own expectations toward teaching. Because it might not always be perfect or easy, but through hard work and perseverance, I'm sure I will become the type of teacher that I picture myself being at the beginning of the program in 2020. Thanks to the experience, I realized that I want to be the type of teacher students feel comfortable and confident. The students look up to me when they're facing difficult situations. And in the pedagogical aspects, I feel motivating about English teaching. Even when there's a constant threat about AI and the future of pedagogy, thanks to the wonderful students and thanks to all the people I met during this practice, I realized that there is a big thing that AI will never replace, and that's the human factor, the ability that we have as teachers to empathize and connect with the people. And that was the biggest reflection and the most important aspect of this path in pedagogy for me. Thank you very much.